Good day, everyone. We are the students from Bicol University Pulangi campus, taking up the course of Bachelor in Science in Computer Science stream. And we are the group number 4 that will going to discuss about information, information assurance and security that has the following objectives. In our discussion, we will going to tackle about data, define information, determine the difference between data and information, explain the three factors of authentication and their uses. The next one is explain the process and values. And the last one is characteristics of a strong password to end user. But before that, let us first introduce ourselves. By the way, I am Divine Laika de la Cruz Trabe, and I'm going to tackle about the three key factors involved in authentication.
I'm Janica Ella Piruani, and I will discuss the topic how the three key factors involved in authentication work, use, and function.
So hello everyone, I am Janil Tipaji and I'm going to discuss all about the process and values of two-factor authentication.
Hi everyone, I am Raymond Pahariel and I will going to discuss about the characteristic of an effective password to end user.
So to start our formal discussion, let us first discuss what is data. So in your own opinion or perspective, what is data?
So let me start about giving my own opinion. So in my own perspective, information, data is information processed or stored by a computer. This is information maybe in the form of text like the alphabet letters and numbers, documents, images, audio clips, software programs, or other types of data. That's all.
In my own
Data
point of
is
view, data is a collection of information that is organized in a specific way. It is typically collected and stored electronically, but it can also be stored on paper.
Data is information that's been translated into a form that is sufficient for movement or processing.
So for me, in the long run of our study, I define data as a set of raw information or raw facts that is necessary to be processed and organized. So we can construct a set of information or single facts. And to sum up our ideas, data is said to be of quantities, characters, or symbols on which operations are performed by a computer being stored and transmitted in the form of electrical signals and recorded on magnetic, optical, or mechanical recording media. In computing, data is information that has been translated into a form that is efficient for movement or processing. Relative to today's computers and transmission media, data is information converted into digital form. It is acceptable for data to be used as a singular subject or a plural subject. Our next topic is all about information.
So moving forward, let us now discuss about the word information. But to start the formal presentation, the topic may ask everyone for their opinion or point of view about their own definition of the word information. Let's start with first Mr. Padi.
So, in my own opinion, information is the summarization of data, or to simply say that information is now a computer-generated data that is being stored in the system of any software application or website. So, this is information being used in order to make verification and authentication during users login and unusual behavior in certain account. That's all for me.
me, information is a set of data that has been processed or organized in a meaningful way. You can get information from the knowledge you obtain by investigating, studying, and instructions.
In my own perception, I define information as the collection of facts or knowledge or data that is already processed or organized in a systematic way.
So, what is information? Information is organized or classified data which has some meaningful values for the receiver. Information is the process data on which decision and actions are based. Information is organized. Information maps out that data to provide a big picture view of how it all fits together. To sum up, data is a collection of facts, while information puts those facts into context. Data on its own is meaningless. When it's analyzed and interpreted, it becomes meaningful information. Data does not depend on information. However, information depends on data. Data typically comes in the form of graphs, numbers, figures, or statistics. Information is typically presented through words, language, thoughts, and ideas. Lastly, data isn't sufficient for decision making, but you can make decision based on information. Next presenter, Ms. Divine Laika Prabe to discuss about the three key factors involved in authentication.
So let's jump into the main topic of our discussion, which is the three key factors involved in authentication. So before we discuss about the three main factors of authentication, let's first discuss about what is the meaning of authentication factor. So, authentication factor is said to be a special category of security credential that is used to verify the identity and authorization of a user attempting to gain access, send communication, and request data from a secured network, system, or application. And as I've said, there are three main factors that authentication factor have. So the first one is the knowledge factor. The knowledge factor or something you know factor may be authentication credentials that consist of information that the user possesses, including this factor the personal identification number or PIN code, a username, a password, or the answer to a secret question. The something you know factor is most common factor used. However, it is also the easiest to beat among the three main categories of authentication. So to avoid our information from those malicious and unauthorized access, we should have a strong password. Professionals are also recommending longer passwords due to the increasing strength of password crackers. And the second authentication factor is the possession factor, which said that the possession factor or something you have factor may be any credential based on items that the user can own and can carry with them, including hardware devices like a security token or a mobile phone used to accept a text message or to run an authentication app that can generate a one-time password or known as OTP or PIN code. So to widen your comprehension, the something you have factor refers to items such as smart cards or handheld tokens. Smart card is credit card size card that has an embedded certificate used to identify the holder. The user can insert the card into a smart card reader to authenticate that individual. In addition, smart cards are commonly used with the PIN providing multi-factor authentication. So in other words, the user must have something, which is the smart card, and know something, which is the PIN code. And the last but not the least is the inherence factor. The inherence factor or something you are factor is typically based on some form of biometric identification or biometric method, including fingerprints or thumbprints, facial recognition or voice recognition, retina scan, or any other form of biometric data. So to make it simple, this factor describes the something that user is. So about my discussion, what is your there's any if is there any questions or clarifications?
So, Miss Divine, like Arabe, I have questions for you. Can you explain why we need to use more than one authentication factor and how does it important?
So to answer your question, we need to use more than one authentication factor because it is an additional layer for the assurance that your information is safe. And it is indeed important because there are factors that are easy to beat by the system hackers. And there's a factor that needs to be supported by another authentication factor. Like for example, in possession factor or something you have factor, which the mobile or identification card, and we want to access our information inside those devices or items. And we can access them by the use of password only on PIN code, which classified in something you know, or knowledge factor. I hope I answer your questions clearly. So moving forward to our next discussant, let us call Miss Jenica Ella Piro for her assigned task.
Thank you, Miss Divine, like Arabe. So, the next, in terms of words, use, and function. There are a number of ways to authenticate users and grant them access to systems. The most common methods are password, biometric scans, and ID cards. In each case, the system must verify the user's identity before granting them access. There are three key factors that are used to verify identity and grant them to access the system. First, something the user knows, e.g. a password. It can be a PIN or a secret phrase that you know. Second, something the user is, e.g. a biometric scan. And lastly, something that proves who the user is. Some, it can be a government issued ID card. With something the user knows, can be used to verify your identity and grant your access to the system. The system checks to see if the user has entered it correctly. If not, the system asks for it again. With something the user is, can be verified to identity and determine whether you are authorized to access the system. The system checks to see if the user is who they say they are. If not, the system may ask for identification from someone in the user's trusted network. And finally, with something that proves who the user is, can be used to verify your identity and determine whether you are authorized to access the system. The system checks to see if the ID card is valid and has been issued. In addition, user's authentication is the process of verifying the identity of a user. This can typically be done by asking the user to provide a username and password. Once the user has been authenticated, they are granted to access the system. In function authentication, it is the process of verifying the identity of a user in order to access the specification within a system. This can be done by asking the user for their user's name and password, or by verifying the user's role in the system. For example, a system administrator might need to authenticate before they are allowed to modify a server's configuration. And lastly, security authentication is the process of verifying the identity of a user in order to protect their data and system from unauthorized access. This can be done by asking the user for their username and password, or by verifying the user's identity using one or more security measures such as digital certificate. And that is the end of my discussion. So may I ask if you have some question or clarification?
So, so may I ask my humble question to you, Miss Arawaring? So here it is. So what is the cons or negative effect of if one of these three key factors in authentication is forgotten by the end user or damaged? Can the end user still retrieve his or her information or data?
So thank you, Mr. Paji, for your question. There would be a pros and cons if some of the three key factors in authentication were forgotten by the end user. If the user forgot their password, they may not be able to retrieve their data and information. However, if the user forgot their PIN, they may be able to retrieve their data and information if they have a backup copy of their account password or PIN. If the user forgot their fingerprints, they may not be able to retrieve their data and information, as fingerprints are unique to each individual. Some of the tricky factors in authentication were forgotten by the end user. It may impact their ability to retrieve their data and information. However, depending on the situation, there may be other way for the end user to regain access to their data and information. But still, it depends on the specific circumstances of the case. So, Mr. Padi, did I answer your question?
Definitely. Thank you for answering my question.
So, we may proceed to the next discussion, Mr. John Hill Padi.
Thank you. So hello everyone, I am Janil Tipaje and I'm going to discuss to you right now is all about the process and values of two-factor authentication. So first, let us know what is two-factor authentication and why it is being used. So two-factor authentication, also known as 2FA, or sometimes referred to as two-step verification or dual-factor authentication, is a security process in which users provide two different authentication factors to verify themselves. So 2FA is implemented to better protect both users' credentials and the resources the user can access. Two-factor authentication provides a higher level of security than authentication method that depends on single-factor authentication, or also known as SFA. So in which the users provide only one factor, typically a password or a passcode. Unlike unlike SFA, two-factor authentication methods rely on a user factor, usually either a security token or a biometric factor, such as fingerprints or facial scan. How does two-factor authentication work? So we're now going to discuss about how the process of two-factor authentication. So enabling two-factor authentication varies depending on the specific application or vendor. So however, two-factor authentication processes involve the same general multi-step processes, which includes the following. So first we have, first step, the user is prompted to log in by the application or the website. Second is the user enters what they know, usually username and password. Then the site server finds a match and recognizes the users. Third is for processes that don't require a password. So the website generates a unique security key for the user, which is also known as OTP or one-time password or passcode. The authentication tool processes the key and the site server validates it. So we're now on the fourth step. So the site then prompts the user to initiate the second login step. Although this step can take a number of forms, the users have to prove that they have something only they would have. This includes the biometrics, a security token as I have said before, an ID card, a smartphone or other mobile devices. This is the inherence or the possession factor we are talking about. So 5 is then the user may have to enter a one-time code that was generated during step 4. So, and lastly, after providing both factors, the user is authenticated and granted access to the application or website. So that's all for my discussion. So may I ask everyone if there are any questions or clarifications? You may raise now your question for me.
Mr. Paji, I have a
Yes.
question for you.
Proceed.
Why the two-factor authentication is important?
So based from my discussion, we can say that this two-factor authentication is important as the so-called two-factor authentication is it can help in making a software or application system or programs become reliable and safe to use by any one of us. This two-factor authentication provides a more secure login and access towards data and information. Two-factor authentication furthermore helps prevent in accounts hacking and presenting confidential information to other users who has no authority towards it. Like for example, in online shopping called Shopee and Lazada users is intended to use two-factor authentication like one-time password or passcode or also known as OTP. It includes also biometric scan like fingerprints before entering the system or account. So also we can observe this in the so-called GCash application wherein users is needed to provide answers to some questions before proceeding in changing their PIN if they forget about their old PIN. Thus, in conclusion, this two-factor authentication is important because of the aforementioned reasons and examples I have provided. So, I believe I gave my very best answer that I can give. And so I hope I have clarified and give you the answer that you are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Paji.
So moving forward, may I call on Mr. Rayel to present his discussion. Mr. Rayel.
Thank you so much. So, characteristic of an effective password to end user. So, characteristic of a strong password, at least 8 characters. The more characters, the better. A mixture of both uppercase and lowercase letters, a mixture of letters and numbers, inclusion of at least one special character, exclamation mark, at, number sign, question mark, square brackets. Note that use less than or greater than in your password, as both can cause problems in web browser. A strong password is hard to guess, but it should be easy for you to remember. A password that has to be written down is not strong. No matter how many of the above characteristics are employed, by all systems that use the Lafayette NetID and password. For authentication support, a password with the above characteristic. Please note that other systems may not support similarly strong passwords. For example, a system may not recognize case, may have a limit on the number of characters, or may not allow special characters. It recommends that in this situation, users incorporate as many strong password characteristics as the system will allow. Any question or clarifications for my topic?
So, Mr. Royal, about your discussions in characteristic of a strong password, may I ask about what is the benefits or advantage and disadvantage of having a good or strong password?
Thank you so much for your question, Miss Divine Laika. The advantage of the strong password is to protect your computer be from hacker and malicious software and to secure your information. While the disadvantage is to forget your password because of the for of the strong password.
verification is parallel.
So we have now reached the end of this small group discussion, and we hope that we and you have gathered some of the most important knowledge and idea about the aforementioned topic. That is why let me state our conclusion to formally end this discussion of ours. In this new era that we have together with the advent of various technologies, people are known to be well experienced creatures when it comes in using diversified devices, especially how to use the system, how to create a system, website, software applications, and even accessing different confidential information without permission from any personal and organizational accounts. This is well to be known as hacking. So when we want to protect, secure, and maintain the safety of our personal data and information from those different cyber criminals, we should always know and learn how to use and apply those factors that has a strong capacity of authorization. That's all. We hope that we have given you enough information on some of the intended learning of our subject information assurance and security. That is why we are here to adjourn our discussion. I am Janil Dalangan Paji, and in behalf of my group mates, Miss Divine Laika de la Cruz Rabe, Miss Jenica Ella Palmariaro Waring, and Mr. Raymond Paharayel, we are now signing off as one of your group discussants in information assurance and security. That's all, and thank you.